Hello everyone, my name is Jonathan Rousseau and I am the Campus Sustainability Manager at the University of Ottawa. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the assignment for your course, basically trying to create some green infrastructure programs for the University of Ottawa. Essentially, what we're going to do is look at 10 different spaces on campus and see if we can try to find infrastructure that will make the space more sustainable. But before we do that, we have to understand a little bit about the context. So welcome to the University of Ottawa. We are very fortunate here at the University of Ottawa to be located on 42 hectares of land right in the middle of the city of Ottawa. We are located right beside the UNESCO World Heritage recognized Rideau Canal, and we are serviced by the City of Ottawa's new light rail system. All in all, we are doing really well for ourselves. Of course, what you're seeing right now, this is like the money shot. This is, a beautiful image of the campus, and it's the one we use to sell people on the idea of coming to the campus. But when we're looking at the campus from my office or in facilities, we tend to look at the campus from a different point of view. So this is an aerial view of the campus. You can see kind of a lot of chaos, really. Lots of buildings, lots of roads, lots of green space. So let's clear this up a little bit and take a look. So here's another view of the campus. We've taken away everything and just kind of really focused in on the primary core buildings of the campus. And as you can see, there is a lot of space. The university was built piecemeal over the last 175 years. As we've acquired a bit more land, a bit more space, and we've changed our functions, we've built buildings, and you can definitely see that there are areas that are extremely dense and other areas that aren't quite as dense. So we're going to be focusing in on 10 spaces on campus. One of the spaces is off to the side. You can't really see it, but these are the areas we're looking at, and I'll go into these in a little bit more detail right after I talk about a bit more context about why we're doing these projects. So why are we working on these projects? Well, ever since the COVID pandemic has hit, there's actually been a lot of funding coming from the government in order to try to stimulate the economy and of course find a way to build our spaces in a reasonable manner. So I mean, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, money. There's a little bit of money out there, but this isn't the only reason. Really, the money's out there to help us deal with a couple of key issues. So definitely climate mitigation is a big factor. On campus, we're a pretty concrete heavy kind of campus. I mean, being right in the middle of the city means that there are a lot of issues we have to deal with, and sometimes asphalt is the easiest way to deal with them. But of course, we know that if we can create more green spaces, we can actually reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and maybe even help us reduce the amount of energy we use on campus. Health and wellness is a big thing as well. University is a very stressful time for a lot of people, and recognizing that we can create more spaces that are engaging and relaxing around campus will of course be very helpful for our community. And of course, the pandemic is pushing people outdoors, getting people to really embrace the idea that we should be outside a bit more, because, I mean, let's face it, the air is cleaner, and it's a lot easier to socially distance. And of course, by socially distance, I actually really mean physically distance. But what you're seeing here is a slide straight out of the University of Ottawa's master plan. So we want to develop these spaces on campus. We didn't just choose these spaces at random. These spaces have been part of an ongoing renewal process that the campus is under. So in 2015, the University of Ottawa published its long-term infrastructure assets plan, what we call the master plan. And in it, we identified a lot of interesting developments that we wanted to pursue in terms of growing the campus to its maximum potential. And by maximum potential, we don't just mean like, like put up as many buildings as we possibly can, but also looking at how we can best use the land, how we can incorporate greenery, how we can move people around a lot better. So this master plan has helped guide us in terms of where we should be building our new spaces on campus. But if you kind of take a look at the plan, what you end up seeing is that some of the spaces are just kind of sort of left blank. Like, we know we want to create more green space on campus, and we kind of have an idea of where we want to do it, but we're not exactly 100% sure of what we want to do inside those green spaces. So here's some examples of some places that we've sort of developed on paper, but we haven't really fleshed out completely. On the left, what you see here is a rendering of what the Lee's campus might end up looking like. There's a lot of greenery along the river, and then some buildings to develop with green roofs and so forth. There are people there, and there's some walkways, but we haven't really completely sussed out what that would actually look like. Over on the right-hand side here, you see these white buildings along the bottom end of the picture. Those are the buildings that we're looking to replace the Brooks buildings when they get demolished. And you can kind of see an open green field there right across from the learning crossroads. And that area where there is building currently is going to be demolished and is slated to become a park. Now, we haven't really decided what that park is supposed to be. We just know that we need a green space because previous projects had identified that there's a lack of green space on the east end of the campus. So even though we have the idea to put something, we're not sure exactly what to put in that space. And this can be a problem because the way that grants often work is the government will come to us and say, do you have some shovel-ready projects? And shovel-ready means projects that have been thought out and planned, and they're ready to go. We just need to hire people to build the space. And more often than not, we actually don't have shovel-ready projects that we can just flip around and turn into something immediately. And that's where you come in. Working on these projects, what we're going to try to do is really harness all those ideas, all that potential that can be there, so that our planning team has ideas that have already been generated and sourced by people who've been on campus. And who better to help us figure out these ideas than environmental students who have been on campus for a bit of time now. Now, there have been some changes that have happened on campus, even in the past couple of years. Changes that I believe have happened for the better, and I think that might serve as an example of what can be accomplished. So this picture you're looking at here, these are pictures of what's called the UCU Terrace. So it's the second floor of the University Center, kind of right near the entrance that leads off to 1848. I don't understand what the design idea was a long time ago, but they decided they wanted to put a big concrete pergola up at the top of the space. That kind of broke up the space in a strange way. It didn't really cast as much shadow as they thought it would. Certainly not enough for people to sit around. It's like, oh, what great shadow on a hot day. And so a couple years ago, this space ended up getting redesigned. The new incarnation of this space has a lot more seating around the green spaces. It has a whole bunch of just additional seating for people who want to sit at tables and be able to drink outside, drink a coffee outside or something. It has pollinator patches tucked in all over the place in order to be a little more inviting and friendly to the wildlife. And so the space has become a lot more accessible, a lot greener, and the way it's been opened up makes it a lot easier to do events in this new area. So this ends up being like one of the projects that was a win, and where we were able to improve the space and make it a bit greener. Here's another example of a project that's really just being finished up right now. This is the green space behind the University Center. It's, fully green. There's no one who would look at this space and say that, this doesn't have any greenery. But the problem with this space is even though it was full of greenery, it actually wasn't very accessible. There were no pathways in here for you to be able to walk around, or if you're in a wheelchair, you really couldn't use the space at all. And you can see there are some garden beds that are laid out, but they're laid out in a very informal kind of way, just put down some frames and let's grow some stuff. So over the summer, the loading dock beside the University Center had to be renovated. And while that was happening, we took the opportunity to take apart the space and completely redesign it. So what you see here in the pictures is that we added an additional staircase to the side of the building closest to the Thompson building and removed the one that was behind the cafeteria. This was done in order to be a lot more accessible, like easier to access from the park space. But we also took the opportunity to completely repave that ramp that would go down from the photo building all the way into the entrance of the UCU near the Pivic. And this was specifically done because it wasn't wheelchair accessible. So while we were doing that, we said, okay, well, let's open up the space a bit more. Let's actually increase the size of the little patio underneath the building so that people could actually sit under there and have access to sunlight and sit at some tables. And of course, we ended up planting a whole bunch more trees, a bunch of indigenous species, a bunch of native species, and even some edible plants inside that space. As well as we created a Four Seasons garden with benches so that people would be able to sit down and enjoy it. So, this was a great opportunity to say that while we were working on an adjacent project, why not take advantage of that to improve an existing green space? So the spaces you guys are going to be working on aren't necessarily green spaces, but before we jump into those, I wanted to quickly talk about the 10 kind of priorities for this space. So these 10 themes that I want you to keep in mind while looking at designing your space, whichever space you end up choosing from our list. Now these design features, I'll go through each of them, but the idea is to see if you can incorporate a bunch of them into the projects. I'm not going to say there's a maximum or minimum, but of course the more that you can try to integrate, the better the space will be. Now, the first two we're going to look at are the heat island effect and water retention. So the heat island effect is a well-documented effect whereby if you have a whole bunch of concrete inside of a space, that concrete will absorb heat rather than reflecting it, and it'll slowly start heating up your space. Cities suffer from this a lot, where the concrete of the buildings and the asphalt just soak up all that heat, and then it ends up making your spaces hotter, which means that you have to end up air conditioning more inside those areas to keep everyone comfortable. And of course, you can mitigate the heat island effect by having less dense developments or more greenery, like trees and ponds and so forth, things that will remove that hardscape. Water retention is big. Right now, due to climate change, one of the biggest impacts we're seeing inside cities is actually through stormwater retention. So we're seeing not necessarily more rain in a certain area than we've seen before, but it's happening. The rain is coming down faster and harder over specific periods of time. So the land can't absorb the water fast enough, and then all that water contributes to flooding and dramatically reduces insurance rates. And so any of our projects, it would be beneficial to see if there's a way of retaining more of that storm water rather than trying to channel it directly into a sewer. Inside of our spaces, I think we also have the opportunity to address food security. This can be done in many ways. One of the examples I'm showing here is through an edible landscape. So planting edible foods rather than just ornamental foods inside your space. There's also the question of carbon sequestration. ideally, what we'd want to do is try to create spaces that will absorb and store CO2. There are lots of different ways of doing this with healthy soils or with trees and things of such. But it would be beneficial if we could find ways of storing and sequestering CO2 inside these projects. Of course, there's also just the simple idea of increasing green space. A long time ago, the park in front of Tabaret actually used to be a parking lot. And nowadays you couldn't imagine anything but a park in that space. So there's the opportunity of softening some of the areas by adding more greenery and turning them into functional green spaces. There's also the idea of recreation inside of a space. The example I'm providing here is, this is very specific. This is basically an outdoor gym, but there are lots of different ways that you could increase recreation inside of a space without necessarily having to put in equipment. But it would be something nice to have because on our campus right now we're limited to what you can do inside of the gyms, and quite often those gyms fill up and there's enough space for everyone. So if we can find a way of bringing some of that outdoors, that'd be fantastic. Social interaction, so important. Right now we're being asked to distance ourselves because of the pandemic, but once this all passes, very quickly people are going to want to congregate and aggregate together again. This image you see here, this was actually one of the concept drawings for the area that has the tent just in front of the FSS building. And in every single one of our designs the university has, it's always been critically important that we design spaces that attract people and bring them together, either to sit and talk or just to relax. But that social component is really important. It is what brings a campus alive. And of course, we want to think about the idea of being able to use spaces as learning spaces or research spaces or as living laboratories. So the picture I have here is really a conference room outside or a classroom outside. But there are different ways that we can use the space outdoors to incorporate that part of the academic mission, either by learning or by having spaces where people can do experiments outdoors. Anything helps because it'll move us outdoors and help us connect with nature. Now, improved mobility is very important. We want to be able to make sure that we have spaces where people can move around easily and freely and in a secure and safe manner. Sometimes this is, by adding infrastructure like bike lanes and so forth, and sometimes it's by reducing infrastructure that reduces mobility. So things like getting rid of a road and replacing with a pedestrian mall is an example of being able to take a space and move it to a higher function. And finally, on our campus, we can't forget that we aren't the only ones who use the campus. It's not just students and staff and everything. We regularly have lots of animals that call the campus their home. Sometimes the best way to accommodate them is to rewild or renaturalize some of the space so that it can be used by the non-human actors that live on our campus. And sometimes it's not about accommodating, sometimes it's just about distracting some of our feathered friends so that they're not attacking you and taking your puts in. So let's take a look at those 10 spaces really quickly. Now, I've given a little bit of description of each of those spaces at the bottom of the slide so you can take a look at later. But these spaces they're all fairly easy and iconic spaces, but they all have their own special contexts and histories. This first space here we're looking at is parking lot K, right beside Nani University. Right now, it's a big parking lot, essentially. But we're hoping that we can do something different with it. We know that this will eventually be developed into a building of some kind, But in the short medium term, like over the next 10 years, we want to see if there's a way of reducing the amount of concrete and asphalt in the space, and maybe do something a little more interesting with it. The other parking lot on our list is parking lot P, and so this is the parking lot that's right at the corner of King Edward and Laurier. This space too, this is also slated for future development of some kind of building or something. But in the meantime, again, it's a lot of concrete, and it's actually kind of an inefficient parking lot as well. So if there's a way that we can do something here that might service a lot of the residences who live in the surrounding buildings, that might be beneficial for them. Recognizing that the space is also pretty loud because it's surrounded by two pretty noisy streets. This green space right beside Fauteur and across from Father and Sons, it's kind of an interesting area. We have one park beside the Fauteur building that is very, very underutilized. It's essentially like 6 trees, and that's it. I think sometimes there's a bench there, unless it gets damaged or something, but it's not very functional in terms of the green space, and maybe there's a way to bring some activity to that. And then right across the street is a small parking lot that, it's probably larger than it needs to be given who it services. It belongs to the university. It's not part of Father and Sons or anything. So, we're looking to see if there's a way that we might be able to do something different with that parking space, and hopefully reduce the amount of parking there, and then see if we can add some added value to that park. So when we were looking at the master plan, I talked about the block of the Brooks building that we're going to demolish to turn into a park. So here it is. It's kind of beside the Learning Crossroads and across from the pharmacy. And so when this building comes down, we know we want to build a green space, some kind of park, but we really don't know what kind of park. Are we talking about a park with water features? Are we just talking about a place to play ultimate frisbee? Like, really nothing has been decided yet. And so if we could harness some ideas about how to use this, would be great. Recognizing that the users of this space will probably be people maybe coming out of the pharmacy and waiting. Might be some students coming out of the CRX building after a class, or waiting to go to a class. And then, of course, where the old Brooks building is now, those will become residences. So you'll probably have some students looking for a little bit of recreational space outside of their building. We have 2 sites to consider here at the site building. The first site is right in front of the building. So these 2 little parks were created along the sidewalks just outside the building. They're kind of, they're basically islands, because on the other side of them you have to have full access for fire trucks and everything. So they're these little islanded parks that really, I don't even think they have benches. They're just a couple of trees. And ideally, we'd like to see if there's something more we can do with that, given their exposure to King Edward, and basically acting as the green space for these buildings. And then on the other side of the site building is this long linear space that runs parallel to the train tracks. And of course, at the south end of this site, it's a pretty steep cliff that just goes right off into King Edward. This site is, it's criminally underutilized. We don't really have anything there. No trees, no benches. I think every once in a while students will pull a chair from inside the building and bring it outside just so they can enjoy a little bit of the sun. But there's certainly a lot of potential for this space. Now, between the site building and the Lees campus is this kind of little area here called the Robinson Circle, basically because it's Robinson Road that goes all around it. Now, this space was acquired by the university during the development of the train, the light rail train, and in the future, I believe that they're probably going to turn it into some kind of housing. But in the meantime, and that could be 5 years, it could be 20 years from now, But in the meantime, we're trying to look for ideas about what we might do with this space. It's a tough space to work with because it is surrounded by the highway on one end and opens up to a community on the other end. But it ends up being pretty tough because it's kind of isolated. And we know that one day it will be developed. It's just in the meantime, we're not exactly sure what we'd want to do with this kind of like medium long-term available space. And of course, this space should be pretty familiar to a lot of you in the environmental studies program. This is the Arts Park. The Arts a little green space in between Samard and the Hamelin building. Now, currently, there's a big patch of grass and a sculpture, some outdoor statues in the space, which is nice. But I feel like we can do better with this space, that we can do something more interesting, especially given that the building right beside it houses the Geography and Environmental Studies program. Now, it's not as big as the other spaces, but it is very high visibility. And so what we'd like to do with this space is create something really interesting, something unique. I mean, the Samard building is getting quite old, and I'd imagine that in the next 20 years, the building might come down or be redeveloped. And if that's the case, we want to make sure that the green space is so prominent that it has to be carried into the next project. Now, this space, this little park that's between FSS and the UCU building, is actually called Park X, mostly because where the tent is now used to be called Parking Lot X, and so this was just Park X. It's ironic, that it's called that, and really there's actually looks like a giant A. You'd think the Avengers work out of this space or something. But this park has always been really strange to me because it's been cut up so many times in order to create more and more and more walking paths, that what's left there now is not really a very functional space. And some picnic tables and a few little trees, but I would love to see if we can do something more interesting here, especially considering that this is literally the heart of the campus. It's right in the middle of all the action, and a lot of people have been disappointed by how much green space is incorporated into the tent area. Although there is quite a bit of green space associated with the tent area, considering, of course, that used to just be a full straight-out parking lot. But given how it's located right in the center of the campus, it seems like we could do something more to increase the popularity of that space and the usefulness of that park. And our final space is an actual street. It's part of University Private. It's the street that goes between the grad house all the way up to the chip stand, which leads into parking lot K. Now, what's happening is that in parking lot K, we're opening up the other side of the parking lot so that cars can go in and out of that parking lot without having to go through the campus. Effectively, as part of the plan to reduce car traffic on campus, we're going to be shutting down this street. Now, it's quite a bit of space when you think about it, like 2 lanes of traffic and 2 sidewalks. And so we're trying to figure out what we might do with this kind of long linear strip of space. Recognizing that, of course, emergency vehicles will probably still need to get across it. But we're wondering if there's something we can do in this space to really green it up, to reduce the hardscape, and to make it more interesting for the people in the surrounding buildings. So those are the 10 spaces, and your mission will be to figure out ways to turn these spaces into sustainable sites for our campus. Thank you, and have a great day.